What's up everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and today I wanted to give you a little tour of the new Jinhao x159. This is a updated version of the original Jinhao 159, which we've carried for probably a decade, and just looking at them in pictures, they look almost the same, but there's some pretty big differences, and that's what I wanted to go over with you today. All right, in one hand I have the original 159, and the other one I have the X159. The original one, honestly, it looks pretty similar, but there's some pretty big differences. The main difference in terms of how it feels, the original one is made of metal and the new one is made of resin. So it cuts the weight basically in half. So the original one was about 50 grams. The new one is 27 grams, which for a pen this size is phenomenal. I actually really love the new version of it because it weighs so much less. It's just so much more practical, and for like longer writing sessions, it's gonna be so much more comfortable in the hand. Even somebody like me, I've got pretty big hands. I don't mind a heavy pen, but when you start to get like that 50 gram and up, even that starts to be a bit much in the hand for a long period of time. So I really like that. It's got some other elements too that they've changed a little bit, nothing too crazy. The overall dimensions are pretty similar, but they did change the clip, which I like because I feel like the old clip, not really sure what that little shield thing is on there, but I never really loved that. I kind of just looked past it, but I really like the more streamlined, simpler version of the new clip. Still plenty strong. It's going to hold the pen just great. And then it's got a slightly slimmer center band that I actually think looks a little bit nicer, even though it's a little thinner. It's got a little more dimension to it, and I just think it just looks more balanced with the pen. So I feel like the old pen just looked a little bit chunkier, and the new one just looks slightly more streamlined, even though they didn't really change that much about the appearance. But then the biggest difference that I think is going to matter, I mean, the weight thing I think is a big deal for most folks. The biggest difference that I feel is that it's the grip of the pen and then the nib. So the old one was fine. It had a good sized nib on it, but compared to how big the nib was, compared to how big the pen was, the nib just looked a little bit small. Now the nib, it's a big nib. It's a number 8 size nib, which is honestly a lot of the reason why we wanted to get this pen in the first place. It's got a little less ornamentation going on, if that's the right word. It doesn't have as much of the metal trim, especially on the grip here. So, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of trade-off in terms of like the threads. I guess the metal threads maybe would hold up a little better over time, but I think the resin threads will be just fine, honestly, especially because the pen's lighter, so there's not as much like strain that's going to be on it as you're handling it. So I think it's fine. And then because it's got that bigger nib, it's going to be a little bit fatter of a grip section, which I actually like. So it doesn't taper quite as much. To me, that feels a little more comfortable in the hand. And then there's not as drastic of a step, and the threads themselves are a little bit thinner. They're not quite as chunky as what was on the metal one. So I think overall, it's just a little more comfortable pen to hold in the hand, size-wise, weight-wise, and then to have the bigger nib, it just looks really impressive. I like the design of it. The whole pen overall just looks a lot more balanced. So a little bit higher price, going to 15 instead of $12.50, but honestly, that's a pretty small amount compared to what you're getting, I feel. So I feel like that's very reasonable. Another benefit to having the lighter pen, since it's such a big pen, you can post the old version, but it gets to be so heavy and so back weighted, it's really not comfortable or practical. It does post, but I never post it. This new one though, I would totally post this, and then you get to keep all the pen together and super handy. So it's just kind of another little benefit. So nice thing about this pen, especially for a pen in this price range, you get a converter with it. Now it's a Jinhao converter, and it's, probably not of the exact same quality you would have with most other standard international converters, but it comes with a converter, which is kind of nice. So you can use that. You can use cartridges, standard international cartridges, or you can use a different converter, but this is not bad for what comes with the pen. I wouldn't recommend eyedropper filling the pen just because it has a metal section right here and the ink can react with that metal, but and then because it's got a trim ring here, there could be some potential leakage and stuff, so I wouldn't recommend it for that, but for a cartridge converter, pretty decent. So one thing looking at this, other pens that I've used, like the Pilot Custom 74, a number of other Pilot pens, the Platinum, Procyon, will often have a filler hole that's kind of closer to the tip here, not all the way back at the grip. It almost looks like it has that here, but it's just an indentation in the feed. So don't get too excited. It's a bargain pen. you're not getting all those super nice features, but it does have a pretty good size feed, and it's going to hold a lot of ink in those fins that if you try to blow a piece of fuzz out of it like I did, you'll get ink all over your fingers and spray it all over your desk. But no, it fills up here, so you do need to submerge the entire nib in when you fill the pen, or you can just take the converter off and fill it too. That works. All right, so let's give this thing a little test drive. I filled it up with Noodler's black ink, which is just, it was convenient because I was already doing this for our Nib Nook writing tool on our site. So that's what I already had in here. It's a pretty conventional nib. You know, the thing when I inked it up, I was curious, is this number 8 nib gonna write a lot different? And it's tough to compare to the other 159 because that one we only have in a medium nib. This one we have in a fine nib. So immediately it's gonna be a little bit different just because it's a finer nib. And it's, you know, it's not some name brand thing. I honestly don't know who makes their nibs or if they make them in-house or what, but it's a Chinese brand. And given the price of the pen, I'm not expecting the world from it, but you know, aesthetically, I like the number 8 size nib. I feel like maybe you're getting a little bit of spring to the nib, you know, especially if you write heavier handed, but it's not like it's gonna write like a gold nib. So just want to set your expectations there. I find that it's really pretty smooth. The first, I used a couple different pens. One of them was great out of the, I'll say box, it doesn't even come in a box, but one of them was pretty great without needing any adjustment whatsoever. The other one, the tines were a little tight. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the tines feel a little tight and the flow is gonna be just a little bit dry, especially when I was kind of rotating the pen in my hand and kind of like, you know, rotating side to side, the stroke got a little bit weaker. So when I opened up the tines a little bit, which literally I just did by kind of like pressing it down, not flexing it too hard, but just giving a little bit of intentional pressure enough to spread the tines just a little bit apart, that increased the flow and made it write a whole lot better. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing that on a pen that's in this price range just because, you know, it's a steel nib, it's gonna be pretty strong. It's hard to really go too far with it, with adjustment, things like that, but it did make kind of a world of difference when I was writing it with that one particular pen. Again, you might receive one just fine, but I found that to be of benefit. And then flow seems to be pretty decent, pretty consistent. It's not like the finest tube nib that I've ever used in my life, but I think it's very adequate for a pen in this price range. And you know, I like the look of it. I think the performance of the number 8 nib is pretty decent. You know, one thing that you're probably curious about is, can you swap this nib out on other pens? I haven't really tested that out yet, but I'm not optimistic that you would really be able to do that without bending and doing some modifications. So that's something I would like feedback on for those of you who use these pens and just are okay experimenting. I haven't done a lot of that yet. If I do find that there's something revelatory there, maybe I'll do a follow-up video, but I wouldn't really buy this with the expectation that you're going to be able to use this nib on a whole bunch of other pens. I think just kind of look at this pen, self-contained for what it is. It's a great pen for the size, for the weight of it, the comfort level writing with it. It's a pretty solid performer all around. It comes with a converter. So, you know, I think it's a pretty easy, you know, recommendation for me to make. And I'm glad we have it. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm curious to know. If you want more technical specs and details and things like that, definitely check out gouletpens.com, or you can leave a comment or ask our team or whatever. We have lots of other videos, so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out other things that we have going on. Really appreciate you watching with me today. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.